Our guest today is Lieutenant General Syed Ata Hasnain, who earlier commanded the 15 Corps in Jammu and Kashmir and is the former military secretary of the Indian Army. Well, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Let me start right at the beginning with the Armed Forces Special Powers Act. And why is it that the Army is so resistant to removing that when actually it has become a real thorn in the side of the Kashmiris?
Thank you, and that's a expected question. The Armed Forces Special Powers Act was actually brought into place in 1990, as you're aware. The original act was 1958, which was applicable to the Northeast. Now, it was brought in for a particular purpose, and that was to actually assist in finding peace in Kashmir. If today in 2014, if we find that we have actually established peace in the manner that we sought peace, I see no reason why the Armed Forces Special Powers Act should not be removed. But the question is, have we achieved peace? That is the moot point. And I think most security analysts today, most observers of the Kashmir situation would have differences of opinion on what really the meaning of peace is.
But sometimes the law, and particularly AFSPA, becomes the problem. It doesn't remain the solution. So maybe at one time it did answer some needs of the army, but now it might be working against peace. So isn't it time to look at it, to rectify, modify, or throw it out altogether?
Absolutely. In fact, I think that's the correct approach. It's a question of whether we require the law in its original avatar of 1990, or we require to dilute it down to something else. You see, when this whole issue came to a head in 2011, the two sides, basically the state government, Jammu and Kashmir state government, and the army, took two different positions. Since then, there has been no give and take. There has been no consultation. I think the time has come when people should sit together and decide. And actually, we can come to a solution. I'm sure the army will find a way. All that the army is looking for, actually, in this is two things for its troops. One is empowerment to conduct operations without having to refer to any civil authority. And number two, the protection of its men who do not have natural protection under law in the state of Jammu and Kashmir from prosecution in the event of their making genuine mistakes. If these two solutions can be found, I don't see any reason why AFSPA in its original avatar should remain in Jammu and Kashmir.
But there's this huge problem that has happened is that, with the massacres or with encounters and fake encounters, you had Machil, Patribal, Kunan Poshpura, the rape. Whether the army says yes or no, the inquiries have been so non-transparent, and in fact, they've even been scuttled on occasion, that you generate, the army itself generates as an institution suspicion, no faith, fear, all the emotions which you would think that you don't want to incur when you're in a country or in a state which is supposedly in India.
I fully agree with you. You are absolutely right in what you say. But let's look at Kashmir as a progressive continuum of activities through the 90s and the early part of the millennium. You see, in the 90s, a lot of hard power and hard force had to be used by the security forces, and that has diluted over a period of time. Many incidents took place at that time. We have a large footprint, a large military footprint inside Kashmir, and it was obvious that there would be an odd incident here and there, which would not be out of tune with our whole concept of operations. If you look at Kunan Poshpura, for example, that goes back to 1992. That is at the height of insurgency. I think there was a fair deal of transparency to the extent that even the Press Council of India had sent a whole team to examine the issue. And that issue is still under controversy because you don't find enough evidence to be able to actually nail anyone on it.
Yeah, but the Press Council of team went with the army itself. It's like me going, or any of us going to investigate something and then go with the accused at that particular point, then we don't have that locus standi, and we don't acquire that legitimacy that is required to do a free report.
You must remember that in the year 1992, the whole issue of human rights was not what it is today. And progressively, that is why I said you have to look at Kashmir in a continuum. Let's take the example of Machal. Now, I handled Machal, I know. In 2010 it occurred. It didn't happen in my command, but I subsequently handled it. I had no hesitation at all to make sure that all the perpetrators of this encounter were brought to justice. And we went to the extent of actually taking the state government to the court, the Jammu and Kashmir High Court, to fight them to enable us to take over the whole case and prosecute them through the military judicial process. And at the moment, even while we are speaking, the Machal case is under court-martial in Tregam in Kashmir. But coming back to Pathribal and Kunan Poshpora, which are the other two big-ticket encounter cases, I don't foresee any major progress, because unless I look at it in this manner, that unless you have positive evidence, after all, the rule of law has to apply. And if you find evidence, I'm sure there'll be no hesitation on the part of anyone to carry out prosecution. The issue is there sufficient evidence? Now, in the case of Pathribal, there has been a whole summary of evidence that the army has conducted. The same people who conducted the CBI inquiry also came and
the CBI had another conclusion.
It didn't lead to anything, actually. Even the CBI inquiry, it didn't lead to much. They said that the army was involved. They didn't bring in the aspect of the police involvement, which is what the army believes, that the police was equally involved. It was a joint military
So in
operation.
all this, because it's so complicated, and Kashmir has got so many stakeholders now, and so many people working and institutions working there as stakeholders, it becomes very difficult then to get justice for the people, isn't it?
I entirely agree with you. There has to be a different approach. I don't think this stated kind of an approach that we have of carrying out an investigation and trying to bring about prosecution is going to lead to too much. I think we need to sit down with the people. We have to get to the people and see how these emotive issues, Pathribal, Kunan Poshpora, and many others, the unmarked graves issue completely, how all these issues should not become obstacles in the path of trying to bring about normalization within Kashmir.
And this dialogue should be headed by the politician.
Well, it should be all-inclusive, I would say. It should be all-inclusive. Why not involve the army itself?
Involved.
Yes.
Led by the politician.
Led by, it should be, of course. The solution is ultimately political. And it has to be civilian-led, it has to be politically led, this entire thing.
See, you tried when you were there and you were commanding the 15 Corps, you tried all this heart and mind, I forget the exact phrase that you used for reaching out to the people.
Oh, it's called Awami Sunwais.
Yes, but there was this other counter that this is not really the job of the army, and the army is supposed to do what it is supposed to do. And if it starts getting into all this, then it politicizes itself and it doesn't really achieve anything. Do you feel that now in hindsight?
You see, most professionals will tell you, people who are security professionals, will tell you that when it comes to irregular warfare, warfare which is not unconventional warfare, counterinsurgency, any of these kind of operations, you will find that the army has a role in the civilian domain. It is the people. They say the center of gravity is always the people. Ultimately, it's a question of the people wanting something, not supporting the terrorists, not supporting the militant, not supporting the separatists. Now, if there is a cogent effort on part of the state, on part of the political setup to ensure this, that the people are taken above board and they are empowered, then there's no question of the army getting involved in it. But the question is, how many people actually understand this aspect of the security domain? They all think that it is in black and white. The army is for the line of control. The army is to kill terrorists and nothing else. They don't realize intelligence, normalization, everything comes to the people's domain. And unless the army reaches out to the people themselves and makes peace with them.
But shouldn't the politician be doing that and making sure that the people like the army and the army functions in a manner which is conducive to the welfare of the people rather than actually becoming proactive on that front?
That's a very interesting question. The issue is whenever you have an elongated engagement, as we've had in Kashmir now almost 25 years, It's a question of space. You see, the space all this time has been primarily occupied by the army. The security space has been occupied entirely by the army. And the security space involves many things. Most people think that the security space only involves anti-terror operations or the line of control or counter-infiltration. It is not so. It involves a much more comprehensive set of factors which most people are not aware of. Now, progressively, as you start succeeding, the space starts dwindling. The army space starts reducing and the civilian space starts increasing. The question is, at what stage what happens? At what stage the total civilian control comes and at what stage the army takes a complete back foot? That stage has still not come in Kashmir. And it will come. But it's a question of a clear understanding as to when is that stage going to come. For example, I would also outline this, that Kashmir was a public order situation, never a law and order situation. A law and order situation can be handled by the police, by the central police organizations, by politicians, etc. Public order, which becomes a existential threat to the nation, is primarily handled by the army. We are now moving from a public order to a law and order situation. Now the issue is how to identify where exactly we are today. And that is the problem that we are facing today.
Yeah, because nobody's brought in any fresh thought.
Absolutely.
And like you said, there's no dialogue.
Absolutely.
But the other thing is, like when we are in other parts of India, when the army comes in, whether it's to stem some communal violence or to help people in floods, it always comes in and people are sort of applauding that, okay, now we have the army coming to our rescue. I've seen the army in Jammu and Kashmir, and particularly in the valley, which is aggressive, it's sort of always on alert, it's carrying a bayonet even in the civilian areas. It strikes fear. It strikes fear in me, let alone the Kashmiri. Now that, obviously, the army over there has become, in 25 years, what people do say an occupying force and a ruling force, rather than a bringer or a harbinger of peace and amity and, faith.
I think that's a very interesting issue which you have raised. The army is naturally aggressive. That's number one. It's always aggressive. And I already explained to you that the situation which you explained about communal riots, about natural calamities, etc., where the army gets a lot of standing ovation from people and a lot of applause, those are all law and order situations. Right? As I explained, this is a public order situation. You don't have separatist trends in those areas. For example, even if you go to the Maoist areas, there's no separatist trend. It's mainland. It's not a separatist thing. Here it's a separatist thing. Secondly, it's also got proxy support, and proxy support from across the line of control. So the security involvement becomes much larger here, and that is the reason why you find the army in this aggressive stance. But as you had yourself outlined, in 2011-12, we tried this very bold experiment of seeing how the army can reach out to the people in a greater way than just the sadbhavna kind of an approach of doing, material things for the army, for the civilian population. A question of changing the force ethos, what I call the changing of force ethos, which means the spirit in which the army functions. And you correctly pointed out the aspect of aggression. If you ask a lot of people in Kashmir, they will tell you that in 2011 we changed the whole concept of the running of the army convoys, for example. We took out the aggressive content of putting automatic weapons on top of vehicles, right? We made sure that there was no waving to the civilians, there were no whistles and things like that.
I bet it's come back.
I'm sure there are enough good people there who continue believing in this, and they feel that this is a very important aspect of bringing a level of normalcy there. I can assure you that, for example, we were concerned. We were concerned that every morning at 9 o'clock when our convoys are moving, a lot of civilian traffic used to get jammed, and people going to offices were very, very, put to a lot of inconvenience. But we changed the timings, and we changed them to as much as reducing them down to 5:30 or 6 o'clock in the morning, despite the inconvenience to our own troops.
So why doesn't the army just do what it should naturally do from whatever you have said yourself? Just go back, go to the borders, ensure our external defense, and leave this
Is the situation-
area for the politician and the police to govern now?
We beg the question. We are going back to the same question, the question of space. Have we come to that situation where the military space has shrunk so much that the army needs to only go to the line of control? Let me try and explain you in a very, very brief. When infiltration takes place, if it takes place in the area of Tangdhar, I don't get information in Tangdhar. I get information in Anantnag. Right? The reception area for such an infiltration will be in Handwara, not up in Tangdhar. Why I'm saying that most people do not understand that there are linkages to everything which happens from across the line of control deep into the hinterland. The security of the airport, the very important airport and airfield, which is actually an Air Force airfield, how is it ensured? It is ensured not by putting a couple of troops around the wall of the airport. It is done by dominating areas up to 5 to 6 kilometers around it. Who does it? It is the army which does it. You don't see it. It happens every night and day. Thirdly, let me also tell you that it's a risky situation today. We are in the year 2014. We are not sure what's going to happen in the year 2014-15 with what is happening in Afghanistan. I will also go to the extent of saying that Pakistan has not wished away and said that we are no longer interested in Kashmir. There's an internal situation in Kashmir, in Pakistan, which has forced their hand at the moment to take away attention from Kashmir. I'll remind you of 5th of February this year when on Kashmir Solidarity Day, when Maulana Azhar Masood spoke from Bahawalpur all the way to the United Jihad Council at Muzaffarabad. Now, these are all portents of what is going to happen. So, why are we in such a hurry to remove the army from the areas which are natural to it to provide protection at the moment? An odd incident will take place. It will continue to take place. What you need is what you said in the beginning, transparency, and ensure that the army works with the people to bring peace in these areas.
Yes, I think you need the army to work with the people, to strike sufficient support, to move away from being an aggressive force or an occupying force. And for that, maybe AFSPA and demilitarization are two issues that really need to be looked at and revisited again. Well, thank you so much, General Hasnain, for giving us this time.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.